Hi, David. So lovely to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well.
And David, now you are out in Stockholm. You're the managing partner at a legal firm called Cirio. And
Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear your legal perspective because, as you know, we've been doing a whole series of interviews on the vested model.
Mm.
And it's something that I know that you're quite a big advocate of. So, would you mind telling us a bit more about that and why?
Yes, of course, I'd be happy to. Um, I mean, this is something I have been working with outsourcing, mainly in the tech area and other areas for a number of years, maybe 20 years or so. But I think it was like, I don't know, 8 years ago, we had some discussions within the firm, and we thought, oh, we are good at making these great outsourcing agreements, etc., etc. But then we get this feedback also from the clients saying that, oh, these contracts that you write, they are great, but then we put them in a drawer, and we don't really, when we bring them out, we have a dispute, and they don't really support the business. And that made us think that maybe there are better ways to do outsourcing, and there's large sorts of supply chain contracts, or whatever. And this is when what was sort of started the research or search for better ways to do it. And that is when we found vested. And then I have been working with it ever since, and now I also teach vested at University of Tennessee, etc., and have done, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 deals over the years. And it's easy to be a strong advocate for it when you have actually done it, because it just makes so much more sense to do business in this way. You create so much more value, you generate so much more innovation, and also sort of the mood and sort of the atmosphere in the relationship becomes so much better. So I mean, first of all, it's because it's a better way to do business, in especially when you have sort of large, complex relationships with a lot of potential for innovation, etc. And as a positive side effect, also people tend to become happy. I have seen when doing this. Also frustrated, not only happy, but they just it's a nicer way to do business, as well. So I mean, since we are a law firm, and our goal is to help our clients to do the best possible business, and this is a great way to do business. Of course, we support the model, so to say.
Well, and as an ex-solicitor, I appreciate happy clients is something that you definitely want when you are a managing partner at a legal firm. So
Mm.
obviously, Vested's got a very important role to play.
Yeah, no doubt. Mm.
And is it something that your clients have embraced? Because I appreciate, it's been in discussion since, what was it, sort of 2003, that conversation started happening around the vested model. But it took a long time for it to actually get momentum.
Yeah, no, I think actually it was the research project that was between 2003 to 2009, 10, I think, and then it was launched in 2010, and we came on board 2012. No, this has been a sort of a slow uptake, but our clients are embracing it to a larger and larger extent, and I think for various reasons there's more and more talk about and an understanding that sort of the traditional, sort of more transactional, power-based ways of doing business that can be good in some contexts, but especially we have such a sort of innovation-focused economy in the entire economy, and also there's this growing understanding that, well, there's a look for this partnership approach to do business. More and more companies are talking about that, and then they realize, well, we want to do partnership, but we don't know how to do it, and then Vested is sort of, for me, it's the sort of the best way to do it. So definitely sort of increased embracement of the model over the years.
And I suppose when you're able to actually see it in action, you're able to show your clients that it does work. Because
Yeah.
I can imagine that it must be sometimes hard to get your head around.
Yes, and that's sort of the one of the hard parts, because I often use, also when I teach this, I don't know if you recall the movie The Matrix, and in the first movie, when Keanu Reeves sitting on the other side, Lawrence Fishburne as well. You have the red pill and the blue pill. Do you want to know what the matrix is? You have to take the red pill and see how deep the rabbit hole goes. And it's pretty similar actually, because you cannot. And I can teach a lot, I can tell everyone, etc. But it's quite another mentality and another way of doing business, and that you have to experience that for yourself. So there's always a bit of a leap of faith, of course, and not least sort of lawyers, but many people, just people in general, are a bit sort of risk averse, of course. So for some, it's a bit hard to embrace that. But when more and more people are taking that leap right now, even though they don't exactly know what will happen actually, but they understand. I think intuitively they understand that this is a better way to do it often.
And are you finding that to be the case with big business as well as with sort of entrepreneurs and smaller businesses that you're working with?
Yes, definitely. Actually, with most of the vested deals that we do, and I think that are being done over the world, is with sort of larger corporations, actually, because they also, have many of them have reached. Some I think remain in the sort of middle age, but more and more sort of are very progressive in their thinking and needs new ways of doing business. Also, they understand that they need to do that to build further competitive advantage, etc., etc. So and also since vested is typically used in larger deals, and hence smaller companies don't do larger deals typically. So it's mostly the larger companies that do it actually.
And I suppose collaboration is obviously the key when it comes to vested. Many are of the opinion that the COVID pandemic has been sort of a perfect storm to force people to re-look at their business models, to look at their behaviors, and to look at how they do work together in a new and more innovative way. Do you think that COVID has maybe provided a lot of business for you potentially, but a perfect storm to embrace the vested model?
No, actually not. I thought so also a year ago, because for many law firms, what happened was all of a sudden, the force majeure clause had a revival, and law firms all over the world, they submitted memos to their clients about force majeure clauses, etc., and just to find out, they don't really work, etc. And then we also thought that this is something that typically, since the force majeure clause won't work, then there will be sort of a lot of maybe sort of troubles in the customer supplier relationships, etc. But it seems that it has not been such a big problem actually. And I just, my personal, we have discussed with clients who have sort of both vested and non-vested agreements, and sort of the feedback we get is that the vested agreements has worked better, but also sort of the non-vested agreements have also worked quite well. And I just have a feeling that, just from a human perspective, everyone thinks, no, we're all in this together, and now we sort of and let's solve this. Actually, of course, there has been problems, and a lot of companies going bankrupt, etc., etc. But I thought what you said was going to happen, but that did not really happen. But it hasn't really changed that long ongoing trend towards partnerships, and maybe for some it's sort of an increased understanding, but no real effect, I think.
It's still a great positivity that even here in the UK, that COVID has made a lot of businesses look at their behaviors and look at their processes and be more collaborative and be more innovative. I think one of the comments, and maybe you with teaching this, is that a lot of students embrace it in a more readily in their thinking and their approach, where managers, again, as you mentioned, maybe being more risk averse or wanting to see it, that see before you buy or try before you buy type attitude, that they struggle a bit more with it. Are you finding that it's a bit about leadership and behaviors, and that's what needs to be changed to embrace vested?
Yes, definitely, and also, but it's very much sort of about culture and habits. Most of the senior executives today, they have been doing business in the old traditional transactional ways for maybe 20, 30, 40 or more years. And the standard ways of doing business has been you sort of you use your power. The other party is sort of, you should have them on an arm's length, and not, at least since I'm an attorney, from a legal perspective, you protect your client's interests, and so the risk for the client is the other party. I need to protect it, protect them from them, and hence I have to write clauses, to prevent the other party from doing bad things, etc. And it's just, the way this has been taught and it's been done for so many years, and it's hard to change the habits. I think, and and also many firms in procurement departments, etc. You have sort of the incentive schemes for the procurement staff is to lower cost, and that's always a focus on price, etc. So everything is built, or the system is very much built around having traditional business doing in a more transactional way, not for vested actually. And then of course, if you're a student, you're not sort of that damaged, so to say. You can come in with a fresh pair of eyes.
Yeah.
Actually, but then I shouldn't be too unfair here. Also, I see vested being promoted, not, as I said, mostly by mature large corporations, also, and so they are really the driving force here also. But many are of course stuck in old habits.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I mean, like you mentioned, drafting legal contracts is protecting your client from everything and everybody else. Not easy. So how on earth do you draft a contract to include vested when it is traditionally based on protecting and being risk averse and ensuring best outcomes for your client?
Well, it's not that hard as you may think, actually. I mean, quite often still it's a legal contract that you write, and a contract is very much, of course, about protecting, etc. And there are risks in these businesses also, so you need, of course, some limitation, liability clauses, confidentiality clauses, etc. But then there is one sort of thing is, of course, that you can do it much more fair and balanced. So that is one. You use sort of the traditional clauses, but you have them in a more fair and balanced way. And that is typically when, if you have sort of equal bargaining power, that is typically where those agreements, traditional agreements also will land. So from that perspective, it's not that that hard actually. But then of course in invested, and I don't know how much sort of listener knows about this, as you have a shared vision and you have these sort of guiding behavior principles, which are sort of moral norms that you transform into contractual norms, etc. And that is of course new for many. And I have also seen, I'm a Scandinavian lawyer. I have a more of a civil law approach, and I think you said you're a solicitor, and then you have typically more a common law approach. And there's slightly, common law lawyers are a bit more nervous about sort of when there's less detail and fewer words in the contract. And that is because how the legal system works in common law countries. But I also find actually that common law lawyers, when they sort of get the nerve of this and get sort of understanding, they also sort of come around and find out that it's not that hard actually to do it. But of course, it's a new approach, and maybe that's sort of the biggest. The hardest thing to understand that this is slightly different. You have to take a new approach.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping then the new approach makes dispute resolution a lot easier, that sort of it's not running to the courts with massive, filing massive suits. It's actually a proper collaborative resolution situation.
Yeah. Again, it's as far as I know, no vested agreement has yet gone to court.
Wow.
Yeah. So but also actually, if you think of it, very few agreements go to court.
Yeah.
And there's also one thing here, that the vested model is, so it's not one size fits all, or it's not a good fit for all deals actually. It should be sort of a complex, quite large, and very often it's deals where there's a high dependency between the parties. because they have worked together for a long time, or the supplier may have built up knowledge and made investments, etc., etc. So you're sort of very dependent on each other, and then you don't take one another to court in any agreement unless in extreme circumstances, actually. So, but of course, I mean, there is this proactive approach to prevent friction, actually. If you write the contract and you set up the deal to much more not focus so much on misaligned interests, and what will happen if you don't do as I tell you. The question is more, how can we have aligned interests and aligned expectations over time, and you build the entire deal around that, and then of course, so the level of disputes and friction decreases massively.
It's a totally different language, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
totally different language, totally different thinking.
No, and that is, I think, important when you think about sort of traditional risk. Of course, contracts are about risks, and we as lawyers, we like to think about risks.
Constantly.
But then again, if you think about the traditional contract, sort of the main mechanism to deal with risk is really some kind of power. You do as I tell you, or I take you to court, or maybe you do as I tell you, or I leave you for another party. And so there is this approach to power-based way of risk, with sort of the assumption that we have misaligned interests. And when you do this in the vested, we call it relational contract, so the contract form underlying the vested agreement. And the question is different, as I said. The question is not, what should happen if you don't do as I tell you, but it's more, let's mitigate risk by going to the root cause of the problem, misaligned interests, and let's see, how can we do something where we have aligned interests? And you do that with a number of approaches, including the pricing model, and also how the contract is written. It's definitely a new approach to risk as well, but which makes much more sense often, I think.
Absolutely. And like I say, better outcomes, because it's a balanced perspective and everyone is trying to achieve. No one's trying to stand on anyone's head. So
no, exactly.
Better for everyone. And with such a great model, and with you being such an advocate, what are your hopes for it for the future?
No, I think my hopes is that vested becomes sort of a toolbox in all organizations, or tool in all organizations toolbox, actually. And again, I don't sort of advocate vested for all deals. When we talk about sort of buying or selling more simple stuff, really goods, etc., and then there is no use in building strong partnerships, etc. You can use sort of the traditional mechanisms, etc. But more and more deals are, to lesser and lesser extent, value is created within a firm, like in a vertically integrated firms. Most companies right now, they generate value in networks, often long supply chain networks, etc. And there is so much focus on innovation. And then vested is such a great tool to use to do more and better business. So that is my first hope, of course. Of course, I want everyone to do vested, but first of all, to have it as a, as this tool that you sort of always can bring out and see, is this a good candidate for vested? Sometimes not, many times yes, and then start to use it more.
Well, I absolutely agree, and it sounds it's a great solution for business. And you say happy employees and happy solicitors. The courts and, I suppose, dispute resolution forums might not be as busy as they used to, but that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
No, I think, of course, then they can focus on other things. Of course, we are humans. Disputes will not disappear, but they will hopefully disappear from these kinds of agreements.
Agreed, and that's a great thing.
Yeah.
David, you're wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights with us.
Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you too.